This week on Head to Head, the politics of Star Wars.
You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars. Begins now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vancil.
And I'm Darryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this podcast. So, Darryl, Comic-Con actually passed us not too long ago.
Right.
It was like a couple of weeks ago or something. And, of course, we've got the Power of Costume, that Star Wars exhibit coming up.
Yeah, that's going to be really dope. It's going to be at the DIA, Detroit Institute of Arts here in Detroit. So I'm really looking forward to go checking that out with you. We got Vader costume, Stormtroopers. Hopefully the Royal Guards will be there.
Yeah, I think pretty much every costume is. And the thing that's cool about this costume exhibit is the fact that Star Wars is actually really known for their costumes. I mean, they spent, when George actually had all the costumes made and everything, I mean, he really took a lot of time and he hired some top talent.
Yeah, I mean, those things are really sweet. The detailing that's in them.
Oh, and the fabric. I remember just seeing it once again on the prequel DVDs. They actually went really into heavy detail about the costumes, and I was amazed by everything.
Yeah, they already, at this exhibit, they even have like the first drafts of some of the costumes. So you kind of see the evolution of what was like Chewbacca's like original costume supposed to be.
Oh, really?
Versus to what he's going to, like what he ended up being, you know, so that's cool.
Yep. And I actually heard they also have some of the stuff with Palpatine. Like they actually have the costume when he was still Palpatine, and then each succession
he got, getting creepier.
Basically getting creepier. Even like the fingernails, like how from the Return of the Jedi one all the way up, like they from episode 1 to 3.
Oh, okay.
Just from when he was still, human looking, obviously.
Right.
Just like his descent. Yeah, they actually did a lot of stuff.
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm really looking forward to that. And don't forget, everybody, we're going to be featuring our visit to the Power of Costume, the Star Wars exhibit, in a couple of weeks.
Yep. So make sure you follow us on Twitter for those pictures. We're going to be there. We're going to hopefully get some really good shots of the costumes. They're allowing photography, so that's really cool. So this should be a really good time for us.
Yeah. Definitely check out our social media.
Well, I'm a little bit thirsty, so I think I'm going to head over to the Cantina.
Let's do it. Let's go to the Cantina. So what's first up on our Cantina discussion today?
Well, speaking of like the Comic-Cons and all the things like that, Boba Fett.
Jeremy Bulloch, yeah.
Yeah, the Fett is finally putting down the blaster and the helmet. He is no longer doing the Comic-Cons anymore. He's retired.
Yeah, it's kind of sad because his health, I guess, is failing. And, he's still willing to, so if you send him stuff, he'll sign it.
Yeah, but it has to be like regular letters. It can't be anything like huge. He just takes regular standard size envelopes. So if you want to write him or something and tell him how much you appreciate his contribution to Star Wars, do it.
Yeah, because the thing that's sad about that, this actually brings up a really good point, because people are starting to get, the Star Wars people aren't getting any younger.
Yeah, I mean, Harrison Ford is definitely up there. Mark Hamill is a little bit younger, but he's still up there. And
sure, Ian
McDermott, everyone.
Everybody is getting up there, and it's all these people that are gracious enough, especially the ones that have been regular visitors, or not even really visitors, but people that have actually attended the convention, signed autographs, and given their time to us, the Star Wars fans. They're all starting to retire. David Prowse, the original Darth Vader, he ended up, because again, failing health, he had to retire from the convention circuit. Now, he's a little different because obviously he wasn't welcome at the official ones.
Right.
But he did go to a lot of the other ones. Peter Mayhew, I think, went to a lot of them.
Yeah, Peter Mayhew, and he has a lot of the knee issues, and so that's troubling for him. So he can't walk a whole lot. So just try to, if you can, get to the Comic-Cons and the conventions while you can, and hopefully you can see these awesome actors and actresses, and hopefully we can see you there too.
Yeah. What do we got next?
Well, episode 9. So Lucasfilm and Disney announced that they're not replacing Carrie Fisher. They're not going to do the whole CG thing like they did in Rogue One, but they're actually going to use unused footage from episode 7 for the new movie, episode 9. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the thought that I have was, as excited as I was about the fact that they were going to use unused footage from episode 7, they're actually also going to be using unused footage from episode 8. That was what was recently announced last week.
Okay. So what do you think Carrie's role is going to be in this movie?
That's going to be really interesting because I'm really not sure. I've been thinking about this ever since when they released the news about 7, I was thinking, that's going to be odd because if you think about what her role was in 7, and there's unused footage, obviously they're getting it from scenes that they probably maybe they rehearsed them, maybe they were scenes that they were going to put in the movie but then decided to just cut out for story, or they're going to save it for later, which would be about the only thing that would work. Because if you think about where the story is now, after The Last Jedi, I'm wondering what scenes she could have done that would have been relevant to where her character would be in 9.
Yeah, those are all. That's a very good question.
That's why I'm glad that they announced The Last Jedi. I could see that a little bit more, but even then, it's like if you think about where her character has to be in 9,
yeah,
what scenes could possibly be relevant from them? I'm really curious.
Well, unless they've had some shots with her and Daisy, because last we left them, they were boarding the Falcon. So maybe they have them like at a base or something, and she's kind of giving her some background on Luke or whatnot.
Because
they were looking for Luke.
Point. Yeah,
they were looking for Luke in 7.
Oh yeah.
So maybe she's continuing like the story, the lore of
that's true.
My
maybe
brother.
They actually did something where, like for instance, Han Solo was the one that ended up telling Rey and Finn all about Luke Skywalker and that the Jedi were real and everything, and that he wasn't just a myth. There may have been a scene where either that was supposed to be the Princess Leia character giving them that information, or maybe when they did get back to the base, maybe there's a scene where Princess Leia basically gave them even more information.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. Maybe she gave it because when we last left them in 8, they boarded the Falcon and they were, heading back, and she was saying like, well, how are we going to rebuild? And she said, we have everything we need right here.
Well, there's that too. See, I was actually referring to 7.
Well,
because, Solo did that in 7, but you're right. So there could be the unused stuff from The Force Awakens, or maybe they actually talked about it even in 8, because you're right. There was that whole scene on the Falcon, and we don't know what they cut out or what they left in.
So I guess we just have to, wait to see what JJ gives us.
That's just something that's just been on it's going to be on my mind until...
Yeah, I think it's on every fan's mind because... first of all, we all love Carrie Fisher, and we didn't want to see her replaced. And then now you decide to use some unused footage. So we're just trying to see how they're going to connect the dots, and we just don't want it to be forced in.
Believe it or not, that was the one thing that I never really thought of when they were talking about, well, what are we going to do now that Carrie Fisher unfortunately has passed? What are we going to do with her character in 9?
Yeah.
And my thing was, I wasn't sure if they were going to replace her, get another actress to play Princess Leia, or if they were just going to kill her off.
Yeah, because that would have been the easier route, or unless you just made it so she was off in the galaxy taking care of some diplomatic mission again.
Yeah. Or maybe she was trying, exactly. Or she was trying to reestablish, because remember in The Last Jedi, she was talking about how she had sent out a signal to all these people and nobody really came. So maybe she was going off to
figure out what happened.
Yeah,
like, hey guys, why didn't you show up?
Yeah, why didn't you show up? Or maybe we gotta, everybody forgets that the whole New Republic government was blown up at the end of 7.
You're right.
Well, the only thing that was left really was the Resistance. So somebody has to go back and rebuild that government. And at first I thought maybe that's what they were gonna do, and just say, okay, her character's off, trying to rebuild the the government.
Yeah, she could be like, on the phone or, some weird device.
Yeah, exactly.
Bluetoothing her way over to the other side. Like, hey guys, what the heck?
Absolutely. But it never occurred to me that where she would end up would be in the movie and actually be Carrie Fisher. I just couldn't believe that they were going to use unused footage, because the first thing that I thought of was, I wonder how they're going to make that work.
Yeah, exactly. Especially being, videographers ourselves, we know the challenges of editing. So, and making everything seamless and make sense. So, we just have to see what JJ presents when he drops 9. But that brings up our next person of interest, which is Mr. Lando Calrissian.
But not the old Lando Calrissian.
Right. Donald Glover, Lando Calrissian.
The young Lando Calrissian.
Smooth, cool Lando.
With the cape room.
Right. So, do you think that he'll ever play Lando again?
I hope so. The one thing that was really disappointing to me about them saying that there wasn't going to be a Solo 2 was not having the opportunity to see Alden Ehrenreich and Donald Glover interacting as those two characters, because actually one of the things that I thought was really strong about Solo was their chemistry together.
Yeah, that was really powerful, and they really did a really good job. At first kind of being adversarial, but then, of course, kind of like learning to respect each other. And
yeah, they're kind of like frenemies.
Yeah, exactly.
And they really carried that off, and they were, I really was looking forward to adventures with Han and Lando, and I thought that maybe, they alluded to the fact that maybe for Solo 2 they would go to Tatooine, meet up with Jabba the Hutt, and, there might be... There's so many adventures they could do, because you could tell in The Empire Strikes Back when those two characters reunite that there definitely is a history there that's more than just, okay, I met you and I lost my ship to you and then I didn't see you again until now.
Well, that begs the question, though. Empire, Lando makes a statement, so you have a lot of guts coming back here after what you pulled.
Right.
And... so Han is kind of like looking at him like, okay, are you still mad about this Sabbat game? So was that the last Sabbat game that we saw at the end of Solo? Was that it?
Well, but
or did they have...
You got to remember the other part to that scene, though. Chewie roared something at him or growled something at him, and Han was like, well, that was a long time ago. I'm sure he's forgotten about that by now, or something like that.
True.
And I don't necessarily think...
So that's like a loophole that they could have said that could have been anything.
Well, it could be anything, because you can't assume that was the ship, because the ship is right in front of his face. So it wouldn't be like, he would forget about that.
Mm-hmm.
It's if Chewie was like, oh, yeah, you remember that time that you won the Falcon off of him? And he was like, oh, I'm sure he's forgotten about that by now. Well, the Falcon's staring him in the face, so it can't be that. So it has to be something.
Well.
Now, again, because I still haven't finished The Last Shot. Yeah, I know. The countdown continues. We're going to be in episode like 157. I'll have read every other book, but that one will not be
because it's not the
on one of those lists. That's right. It's got to be the last book at this point. But it could have been addressed in the latter half of that book, or some of the other Han Solo novels and canon, the comics and things that have come out. Because admittedly, it's just like you and I have talked about. Look, we don't have all the time in the world to keep up with every little release that comes out, as much as I would love to, because...
And get paid for it, of course.
Yeah, listen, everybody, if we were paid to do this podcast full time, we would be all in. And believe me, right now, I don't know if you guys have actually read a lot of the stuff. As I said on the last podcast, I did read pretty much every book that was released, between Force Awakens and Last Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
I did. I read all the canon novels that were released between those two, and I read a lot of the comics too.
Yep.
And they're flawlessly written. They're really good books. And they also really deepen the lore. And that's one of the reasons why Donald Glover, in my opinion, and I had this opinion, by the way, we talked about it, as soon as they announced him.
Well, we actually, to be honest, mentioned him before we were saying,
you're right.
Like,
we did.
It'd be really cool if they got him.
I was really deep into the series community at that point. I still think it's one of the most brilliant shows that was ever produced on television. One of the smartest comedies ever.
Yeah, and he's on ATL too, so that's another cool show too.
Yeah, and he was... You're right. We both said this guy is perfect, even then. And then, of course, the movie comes out, and we end up being absolutely correct. He was amazing.
Kills it.
Now, if you guys have a different opinion, let us know. But he... to me, anyway, and I'm sure to you too, he really personified the young Lando Calrissian.
Yeah.
And to be robbed of seeing that again in any capacity, I'll tell you what, the Jon Favreau TV series is coming out, I would be all about it if he showed up on that.
Well, also, I just would love to see the evolution of Lando. Like, what does he do now that he no longer has the Falcon? Like, what becomes of his flag? What becomes of his flagship now? Like, what's his new toy now? And where does he go off to? And how does he mature?
How does he get into Cloud City, the whole Tibantic gas mines? I mean, how did he become
the Lando Calrissian that we all met?
That guy that we meet in Empire Strikes Back? Absolutely.
Exactly. And where'd Lobot come from?
Lobot. That's got to be a discussion for another podcast.
Yeah, we definitely got to talk about it.
I got some Lobot. I love Lobot.
I think he's like the first guy with the Bluetooth headset because...
Right, yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, the thing about him is that, he's... we're going to end up discussing it now, but the thing that was cool about Lobot was he was the perfect companion to Lando.
He always has to have one because we realized that in Solo he had the robot.
Yeah.
So, or the droid, sorry. But yeah, so now in Empire, he has Lobot, which is kind of half, I guess. And is Lobot really a whole guy, or is he like an android, like Data from Star Trek?
There is a Lando comic series that I have not read yet, but I have it. I downloaded it on my Comixology account, and I think that there's some things that address the origins of how he met him or something, because Lobot's really loyal to Lando.
Oh, yeah.
And he's a really interesting character. So it would be interesting to see how they connected together. I was sort of hoping that was going to be an Easter egg type of a thing that we would see in Solo.
Or that would be really cool. Like I say, if we saw that in the next Solo movie, like him meeting Lobot.
Yeah, but sadly, it looks like there's not going to be another Solo movie. And that's criminal because, again, whatever you guys thought of the Solo movie, whether it was even necessary to have it, it did open us up to a lot of the characters that aren't necessarily heavily featured in the largely Skywalker theme saga. Because we're so concentrating on, the Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, Yoda, Obi-Wan, the whole Jedi Sith dynamic. And then, of course, of the other main characters, you have Han, you have Leia, even R2 and 3PO, really, because the story is told through their eyes. The problem is that some of the other stuff that's alluded to in those movies, Solo answered.
Yeah.
You had the Kessel Run.
Yep.
You had, how did Han Solo rise up to the smuggling world? Because it's obvious, even in A New Hope, but especially, more by The Empire Strikes Back, he was sort of high up in the smuggling world.
Not only that, but I mean, you also got to see how he met Chewbacca and how the life that he actually, he saved his life, basically. So, I mean, that's that whole aspect.
And that's why it would be criminal, because there's so many other stories that they could explore. And if it was just because the movie didn't do as well as they thought, or maybe because of the whole director snafu, it would be a shame to put away all those stories just because of a box office performance.
Yeah. Well, as we get ready to, finish up our last drinks, we would just like to say we want more Lando and we want more Donald Glover.
We want more Lando and we want more Donald Glover as Lando. All right. What do we got next?
We have come to one of our favorite points of the show, Duel of the Fates. Today's Duel of the Fate focuses on who's the better leader, Leia or her mother, Queen Amidala.
Oh, that's another. See, this is right up there with that Tarkin Thrawn thing that we did last week. It's kind of weird because, and I have to say this about our podcast last week. We were, it seemed like we were a little out of sorts. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, one, we knew that we had to deal with a somewhat negative topic.
Right.
We struggle with that. I remember when we were talking about putting the show together, we didn't really want to, we were really thinking about, should we really do this or not? But it's such a big thing in Star Wars right now that we really felt we had to address it.
Right.
And I think that, yeah. And then, of course, we gave ourselves the impossible task of deciding between Thrawn and Tarkin. I mean, good luck with that.
Yeah, we overwhelmed ourselves.
Yeah, we overwhelmed ourselves. And today, on this week's podcast, as we're recording...
We're doing it again.
Yep, we're doing it again, but this time I think we're ready. At least I'm ready. I'm ready to tackle this. Are you ready to tackle this?
Of course.
All right, I'm ready to tackle this. Because this is another one of those, you could really go either way on it.
Yep. So...
Well, let's look at some of the variables.
Go for it.
Now, Amidala, obviously, well, maybe she wasn't younger than Leia necessarily when she took over, but I will say this. She was queen of an entire planet at a very young age.
That's true.
Now, Leia also was a teenage senator, basically, but she was just a senator representing the planet, not actually ruling it.
Right, but she was a princess, though.
Yes, Princess of Alderaan. That's true. But you also have to remember that Leia had the advantage. Whether she knew it or not, she had force powers.
Yeah.
And that gave her, remember how on last week's podcast we were talking about, because that person asked us the whole question about, the force. Last week was a really force-centric Q&A.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. But the thing is that people were talking about, the force, and is it like a natural, if people with natural abilities have more of an edge than people that actually had to study it. The thing is, and this is the thing you got to look at, I think that it does give you an advantage if you have it, even if you don't realize it, because it's increasing your awareness. So in other words, Leia would have all this intuition and all these different feelings about things. Now, she just thought that maybe...
She just had natural...
Yeah, she just had this natural ability, not realizing that the Force was influencing her. So, here's the thing. Here's my opinion, then we could talk about it a little bit.
All right.
I'll give mine, you give yours, and then maybe we could discuss some of the differences, if there are any. I think ultimately, you could say that Leia probably was better and more effective in certain cases throughout all of the canon storyline. Because remember, she's a lot further along in the story than Amidala was. They do have an Amidala novel coming out, by the way, that's going to fill in basically after she was no longer queen and became a senator, like that journey. Because if you remember in episode 1, she's a queen, episode 2, now suddenly she's a senator. It's like, well, okay, how did that happen?
Right.
Novel's going to answer it. But by and large, Leia actually has more of the storyline. Because remember, we see her, in the books, we delve a little into her teenage years. And then, of course, we have all the movies. Then we have all these books. We've lived with Leia longer. We live with the character longer. I think we know Leia better than we know Amidala. So from that standpoint, she was probably more effective. But Amidala might actually be the better leader only because she has no force powers. So this is almost going by Han Solo in some ways actually being a better pilot than Luke or Anakin because Han Solo could do all this stuff with 0 force powers.
Right.
That answers a future Duel of the Fates, by the way. So Amidala has that. And, everybody has to remember that this woman is one of the architects of the rebellion. And she stood up and was one of the few voices that actually could stand up and fight or combat the influence of this growing empire. So in a way, it's a cop-out because I basically gave an argument for both. But I think you almost have to if you want to fairly address the differences. But so ultimately, I would have to give the edge to Amidala simply because of no force powers, architect of the rebellion, and she also really had to fight more. She didn't really have a lot of the support because by the time Leia took over, okay, Leia did see the destruction of the Senate and all that. And then she's a rebel leader. And, I'm not taking anything away from her at all. But I would have to give the edge to Amidala. What do you think?
I think I would agree with you. I agree with that. Amidala's
Man,
I know.
you're not going to be fun today.
Well,
I mean, you're doing the right thing by agreeing with me. I'm just saying though that it's not as much fun for our listeners if you don't disagree.
true. But I think that Amidala is the better leader simply because I think she had more conflict to deal with. And I say that because we saw through various depictions of Amidala, whether it's the movies or the cartoons, she was constantly putting herself in harm's way, whether she was spying, whether she was trying to get information. She was constantly the one on all these covert missions that Anakin had to rescue her from. And, so she took more risk because she really believed. And then on top of that, like you said, she didn't have any force ability to help her out. So she just kind of had to go on her own gumption and her own cunningness and wherewithal. So I think that made her a little bit more superior in that regard. And then also, I mean, she had a huge task because the time period in which she lived, she had to convince, I mean, this whole Clone War thing was just going crazy. It was spread across the galaxy. She's trying to bring things together. You got a Sith Lord that's no one knows that's influencing everything.
I just want a Sith Lord. Get that mace thing going.
Exactly. And then, then she's got like her husband who she's secretly married to, who's a Jedi. And
and
she's got
is that, but I will say this to swing it the other way a little bit toward Leia. It wouldn't be accurate to necessarily say that she didn't have as much help because I could argue that Amidala actually had more. Don't forget, she had the entire Jedi army, if for lack of a better term, behind her.
Yeah.
She had 2 Jedi as almost her personal bodyguards at one point.
That's true. But I think given her time, I mean, because at that time she had to, but if you look at Leia, I mean,
well, that's true. There was assassination attempts. There was,
yeah. I mean, she was constantly getting, they got the little grub worms just trying to eat her while she was trying to sleep.
Yeah, she definitely was in peril more often.
Yeah, I mean, so it kind of warranted that. Where like Leia, she was kind of more like the politician that was behind the scenes. She wasn't really one that would.
Well, I don't know though. She stuck her neck out because in Episode 4, she was captured by Tarkin and Vader, and she endured terrible torture.
Well, she was trying to get free, but I mean, like what I'm saying is like, okay, she was just constantly on the run from everything, except for Endor, where she decided to go. But then she knew she had her brother Luke with her, and Han and Chewie. So
yes, it's true. You can make the argument that at the times that she was in peril, it wasn't necessarily that she was. I mean, it was a covert type of a mission. It wasn't so much of a military. It was
just a ragtag group of miscreants who were just trying to just save the galaxy, basically.
Well, as she always said, I'm on a diplomatic mission.
Right.
And that was essentially, I think the difference is that she was really trying to act as a diplomat, where after a while, well, you could say that about both of them. Mm-hmm. Because Amidala was really trying to be a senator. Mm-hmm. And strictly a senator, operate within that. I mean, let's not forget that her and Anakin had that whole exchange in Attack of the Clones about their differences in leadership. Now, of course, Anakin was sort of laughing off of his whole, well, I think there should be a dictatorship, and, but he wasn't kidding.
No, he wasn't.
I mean, he honestly really, I think, felt that way, but when he saw that it was really tripping her out, he then decided to soften it and do a whole just playing type of thing. But we all know that.
Yeah, because I mean, and to his point, it made sense. Like, okay, was someone wise, but you just don't want to give one person all that power.
Yeah, that's the
and that's the thing, is because you never know what a person will do, or something could influence them, and because they have all this power to do something, it could put everybody at risk. But I think Amidala, given her task of the Clone Wars, she had this whole secret marriage that she's trying to hide from everybody. And then on top of that, she's got to go on these covert missions trying to find out what separatist leaders are doing this. She's constantly in battle in the chambers, battling other politicians. She has to go meet with all these other people. Whereas Leia, at least from what we saw, at least in the movies, we really didn't see her be too political. I mean, I'm not saying that she wasn't, because we know in other forms of media,
there was not really an opportunity though, because just the times, and of
course, like, that was swept away anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there really wasn't any politics. She was part of a rebellion.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, she just kind of was leading a rebellion, and she was just kind of doing that. But I will give Leia.
But again, you got to go to the totality though, because she had to rebuild an entire government.
And that's what I was about to say. She had to rebuild, but to that point, she had the ability to start from scratch. So she kind of had a clean, level playing field to start with.
Yeah, but you could say that's a little bit more difficult. I mean, you're rising. That would almost be like if you were elected senator of the United States government. Mm-hmm. Okay, you have the benefit of already having this system in place versus now you have to create a whole new system of government, say after an alien invasion or something. Mm-hmm. Like the show Falling Skies, for instance.
Well, yeah, but at least I will have all this documentation. I can look at past things that worked and doesn't work. And because I'm the ultimate authority, basically, I could kind of set those parameters based on the knowledge that I've seen in the past, whereas Amidala, she had to basically follow it. She had to follow. She had to.
I see what you're saying.
So she had to
makes
work
sense.
harder from within to change people. And that's the thing, is trying to change a person is extremely hard versus completing.
Right. Like if you can wipe their mind and then just start from, like erase them almost. Yeah.
If you can just input in them what you want them to know and believe.
That's good. That's a good point.
So that's why I say Amidala gets that edge. Well, that was good.
Yeah, that was good. But now it's time to move to our next segment. What's our next segment that we're talking about this week?
From a certain point of view, this is our feature topic.
Yes, our feature topic. Our feature topic today is actually interesting because it really, once again, we're getting good at this. It ties in with our last Duel of the Fates segment, which is the politics of Star Wars. You know, Star Wars, as we've just noted in our Duel of the Fates question of who's the better leader, Leia or Amidala, there's a lot of politics in Star Wars. Everybody gets focused on, they always say the lore or the war. And the lore of the war is basically this. You are either into the whole Jedi Sith Force thing, which would be the whole lore of Star Wars, or you're more into the war, the battles. So it's almost like, which do you like better in the last act? Do you like it when they're doing all the lightsaber duels, or do you like it when they're, fighting in the X-Wing and TIE fighters and everything else, all the battles?
Yeah, and there's also the war of politics, too.
Yes, and that's what's driving all of it. So, yeah, let's get into talking about the politics of Star Wars. So I guess the way we should probably start this is going back, I suppose, to our earliest example of this. Now, not chronologically, but we're talking episodic order, right? Remember the viewing order? Episode 1, of course, Episode 1 was heavily criticized because they felt that it was too much politics. And I actually loved the whole politic thing. I do agree that they could have been handled maybe in a more entertaining way. Mm-hmm. But I love the politics of Star Wars. I love it when you're seeing Palpatine working behind the scenes. You're seeing all the different things, because you always heard about, say, the Imperial Senate. Well, they became the Imperial Senate, but the Republic Senate, basically. Right? You had all this stuff, seeing how Star Wars worked in a political environment. And then, of course, even later on, as we get further into the movies and then eventually into the novels that are now canon, the novel Bloodline, heavily political, dealing with politics.
Yeah.
So you had initially in episode 1, I can understand where certain things wouldn't make sense. Everybody is like this whole trade federation blockade, and everybody thought that they were basically going back to a civics class or something. But, and everybody said it was unnecessary. But my whole thing is like, look, guys, you have to have these things in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's called, Star Wars, and as we know, all wars start based out of some form of politics.
Absolutely.
No war is just, we decided to fight today. No,
That's
it's
a very good point.
I mean, so
It's usually some sort of a feud.
yeah, or a political gain. One person's trying to take over another person's territory for their own benefit, or whatever the case may be. And I love that aspect, and I wish they would show more of that. I thought that, as you mentioned in the prequels, there was a lot of politics going on, and I think it could have been handled a little bit differently in some ways. But overall, I think it's really good because it sets up why we're here.
Oh, absolutely.
It sets up why we're here. It sets up why, we need, Sith and Jedi and all the lore stuff, how they all come into play, because, one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing. And so now that creates that tension. And then you need somebody that's trying to stand up for what's right. But then, of course, as Snoke said, where there's light, there's darkness, and vice versa. So I love the political aspect. I would love to see a movie dedicated to that. And once again, it sucks that, Carrie Fisher isn't around to play Princess Leia, but.
Oh, no, that's a good one. Princess Leia centric. Well, Bloodline. If they just made a movie.
Bloodline, yeah.
And once again, we talked about this. If they just made a movie out of that novel, that would have been anybody that's a fan of the politics of Star Wars, that would have been their dream.
Well, yeah, because you have to see why, like I said, how do we get here, and that's what I kind of loved about even Revenge of the Sith, is that you kind of start to see that the Emperor was building the Death Star he's been building that thing for probably since episode 1, and he's had that as his vision, but he had to quietly kind of build that way on the outer rim, away from everybody else, so no one knew what he had going on over there. And then by the time, we finally see Rogue One, and that's the completion of this thing. And even the little the politics that you saw there between Tarkin and Krennic, and then
the Rogue One politics. A lot of people forget about the politics.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. That's heavy. And then now you see, even when Vader, he's like, well, there was, there's no Death Star. It was destroyed in a mining accident.
Yeah.
That's a typical, political thing.
Yeah, that was hilarious.
Yeah,
when he busted out with that, and sometimes I forget about that, but that was one of the funniest moments. Was absolutely, it's some.
Yeah, you got,
because you're used to those guys essentially just going, yeah, we blew it up.
Yeah.
And owning
do something. Right?
Yeah, we dare you. But you got to remember, this is back in a time when the government still existed and they had to do all this covert stuff.
And it's weird because what's funny about that is that how we knew Anakin Skywalker, he hated politics.
Yeah. Because
he always felt they got in the way of stuff. But then to see him as Vader being political, it's hilarious, because he's
it's probably more like he is just carrying out, because, as much as he hates politics, he probably hates being zapped by force lightning by his master even more. So
yeah, I'm sure he didn't like being circuited. But I mean, I think that's the politics of Star Wars is awesome. I think that it creates it's kind of the same reason why I love the James Bond movies, is because there's usually some political thing that's going on, and James has to go save the day from this particular issue that's causing all this political riffraff. So I think
the politics is where you basically get the story of
exactly.
Everything. I mean, that's where the meat is, and then
now the action comes out of that. And I think that's where you're starting to get, all the lightsaber duels and
and again, it's how they handle it. I think the reason why a lot of Star Wars fans dislike the politics in the prequels, particularly because that's where the politics were the heaviest. I think a lot of it was just the execution, because you have to remember that's really what answered all of our questions about the original trilogy when the original trilogy came out.
Yep.
All the answers that everybody wanted, essentially, I mean, except for the fact of a question like, let's say, how did the Emperor become a Sith?
Right.
Things like that, sure, you're not going to get that question answered, although you might, because I'm sure how he rose to power, as we all saw in episodes 1 through 3, that was a big part of it. Yes, he was already a Sith, but he actually had to still, he couldn't just go in and...
Yeah, he had to progressively move his way up to...
And that was so interesting how he did it. And you see things working, and especially once all the movies were released and you can just see...
Yeah, you can watch them basically from...
Because you're watching episode 3 going, hey, I remember back in episode 1 when he did that. Oh, that's how, and that's why. And
well, even just looking at like something as iconic as the Stormtroopers, you know, like from how, okay, he found this whole cloning facility because he wanted to build this whole army because he didn't want to use droids. And then he found a cloning facility. He created basically the first Stormtroopers, who eventually became the Imperial, and then, you know, the Imperial Army. And then, of course, once that kind of, you know, took off, then, of course, people were getting drafted, no different than, you know, back in the 60s when people were going off the 9 and stuff. So, I mean, it's...
Well, and that brings up a good point, too, because one of the things that I always hated when everybody tries to compare the politics of Star Wars to just politics in our country. Because every single time that things go on in the country that they don't like and a Star Wars movie comes out, they were saying that even back in the prequel era. Oh, George Lucas is directly comparing, you know, the Empire with our current government, or, you know, doing whatever it is. You know, even back at the time of Revenge of the Sith and everything. And what everybody doesn't realize is these are storytelling techniques. I mean, politics hasn't changed in thousands of years. It's the same stuff. We're just rehashing the same, you know, things. And so consequently, all we're all doing is just, you know, when they created this stuff, is they're just taking these traditional battles that humans have had for centuries and just plugging them into these classic stories. A classic good versus evil. And I think one of the things that they're doing effectively now, because I think that the difference between Star Wars movies today versus the ones that were made even as late as the prequels, which were in the mid-2000s, early 2000s, is that they're making everything not so cut and dry as far as all good and all evil.
Yeah.
You know, the characters are basically gray. Yeah. In a sense.
Yeah, and I think that's you know, and the cool thing about Star Wars is it's very emblematic of life, because there's never just a clear cut thing all the time.
Sure. I mean, one of the things I thought was brilliant that they did, and it was looked at maybe more on the militaristic side, but if you really think about it, it's political, is they were in Rogue One. They painted the rebels to not be the squeaky clean good guys that they were portrayed as in the original trilogy. Right. You know, these
they had
guys
to get their hands dirty and do some stuff.
Sometimes kill innocent people and
just to accomplish the mission. But also, and you know, it kind of brings up, and you know, I know people are going to hate me for this, but whatever. But that's one of the things
Last Jedi again.
Yes. It's one of the reasons why I love The Last Jedi, because you know, everyone gets so fixated on these dogmatic ideas, and that's what Luke Skywalker was trying to say. Like, the Force doesn't belong to the Jedi. It doesn't belong like this. It belongs to everyone. It's just like it chooses who it wants to choose, and you know, that's what there's even politics even in the Jedi sector, because
that's true, and a lot of
people people miss that.
Over that. Yeah,
they miss that because there's a lot of dogmatic ideas that they have. It's like, oh, well, okay, you have to be this and you have to be here. And, you know, they wanted to train, you know, kids when they were young because their minds are pretty much clear of everything and they don't have that emotional attachment. But look at Luke Skywalker, you know what I'm saying? He was like 20.
They also picked and, you know, chose their battles too, because on one hand, They would say things like, well, we're not an army, we can't fight battles for you. But on the other hand, they would step in and do those. I mean, being the guardians of peace versus an actual army is a fine line to walk, I have to admit. And things were pretty grim in toward the end of the prequels. Yeah. Especially Revenge of the Sith. But
absolutely,
a lot of it has to do with the Jedi just being so fixated, and that's why I think it was easy to launch propaganda against them.
Yeah, because, you know, anybody who seems too lily white, you know, there's like, okay, you're always trying to, it's easy to try to throw dirt on them.
Sure, because everybody's wondering, what are they hiding?
Exactly.
Nobody's this good, so...
Exactly. You have these powers, and do we really know, are they really influencing people? You know, they're trying to make them, when it's really the opposite. But, I mean, there's a lot of different, you know, political wars going on within various sectors, whether it's military or whether it was in the...
Well, that's the beautiful part about Star Wars is the fact that they keep bringing up all these different... I mean, we were talking about the Solo movie and how we would like to have seen more of those. Well, look at all the politics that happen in the Smugglers.
Yeah.
In Jabba's palace, and, you know, there is well, it's a Legends novel now, but the Tales of Mos Eisley Cantina, where it basically followed a lot of the different characters that all would, you know, meet in Mos Eisley, but it told all these various stories.
Mm-hmm.
And they were really interesting, partially because you saw this whole political interweaving of the different characters and their motivations. Mm-hmm. And some of the motivations were actually fairly surprising. Yeah,
well, even in like, you know, like even in the prequels going back, you know, when you had little Anakin with the pod races, and it's like, okay, when Qui-Gon says, oh, well, do you want me to discuss this with the Hutts? And he says that, you know, to Watto, and Watto's like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's cool, man.
Yeah, no, I'm good. You know, and it's because, once again, that's the hierarchy there in that particular realm. But then you still have it in the Sith, you know, the rule of two, you know, and then there's that whole system that they have. So everybody has their own political war.
You even look at the inter-villain politics, I guess, for lack of a better term. How the Empire and how the Sith in particular allowed the Hutts to rule that particular you know, area, because they knew that they could exploit them for their purposes. But again, there's all those, and then of course you have the Black Sun.
Oh yeah, the whole gangster.
You have
group,
you know the
terrorist group, yeah. And but see, the other one that, and this is the thing that always, and we talked about it last podcast, about Tarkin and Thrawn, and we were trying to figure out, like, well, who was the better leader? But, you know, it's kind of says something about Tarkin, that he kind of has rule in certain aspects over Vader, when Vader is more powerful physically Yeah,
but that's only because the Emperor basically... Now, it's true that Vader grew to respect Tarkin.
Right.
And we especially learned that in the latest Vader comic, actually. It's either this latest one or the one before. I'm trying to remember which. They're blending together. But Vader basically asked Tarkin to test him. So that's what made the comic so cool. Is he wanted Tarkin to take him and a lot of the stormtroopers and hunt him, because Vader wanted to make sure that he was still powerful enough. And he also wanted to test, because he knew that Tarkin was like this expert hunter, that was his whole childhood, and that he, you know, that's where the Tarkin novel's really, really fascinating. And Vader and him have this really cool, long conversation about Tarkin's past. Well, in the comic, they reference that. So Vader's basically saying, okay, use everything at your disposal and hunt me and try to kill me. And Tarkin does, and of course, it doesn't work out so well, but it just shows you that even though Vader is more powerful, and even though he has to listen to Tarkin because the Emperor placed him in that position, that Vader does have an independent respect of Tarkin. There's a part of Vader that listens to Tarkin because he respects him.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I'm just saying, like, you would think that with a Sith sitting at the head, being the Emperor, and his right-hand man being Vader, you would think he would have control over the military. But in fact, he plays... So that's what I'm saying, just the politics in that.
But that's a lot more of a skill-based thing, though. You know, Anakin was never really a smart military strategist per se, nor was he really a good politician. You needed a good politician in order to run... And I suppose, and, you know, this, I guess, could be another Duel the Fates thing in the future. Who's the better military commander, Tarkin or Vader? No, that might be our next one, guys.
Yep. That's a good one. Well, I mean, and I think that in that particular sector, yeah, you need some, and you needed a face. And I think Tarkin, had the better face of the operation. He was a human, first of all, that people can tell, because you didn't know if Vader was an alien under that thing or what.
What's funny is that was an actual speculation in a lot of the novels, is that everybody was freaked out because it's like, first of all, who and what is this guy? Yeah, I mean, he's this, 7'1" asthmatic guy. And he came out of nowhere, seemingly. Yeah, exactly, to most people. But once again, the politics. Exactly, and that's the hiding of certain things and maneuvering of people in certain positions, that really lends. So I would love to see more political centered movies with Star Wars. Definitely. I think wrapping up this segment, it would really be good to see more of the politics, to actually, in some of the movies going forward, of course, to expand them and explore them as they relate to the current situation. But I'd like to see more movies exploring the politics of the past, what led up to certain things. Absolutely. Yeah. All right, what do we got next? Well, after all that political talk, probably need to clear our minds a little bit. So yes. We're going to move to our next. Your minds. Our next segment is Clear Our Minds. And this is the chance where you guys get to ask us questions, and we get to respond to you, and hopefully we can give you some insight on what we think, and hopefully we can hear from you as well. Oh, I'm sure if we get any of these things wrong, we'll hear from them. What's our first question? Well, who's it from? Well, our first question is from Michael Turner. Okay. And it says, it's been said that Palpatine was able to block out the light side of the Force with the aid of a Kyber Crystal around his neck to boost his power. Oh, this again. Yeah. But we have learned that Kyber Crystals are just for lightsabers and for their color. So is Palpatine's Kyber Crystal still canon? As far as I know, it is not. That idea was so here's the thing. The Kyber Crystal in and of itself has not really changed. And by the way, even at the time that it was around his neck, it was powering lightsabers, even under the Legends, like the old expanded universe. Mm-hmm. All Disney did was simply repurpose the whole thing and expand on it. But it always powered the lightsabers. But it also, and, it had the same powers that it has now. It's just that, yes, it was said that Palpatine had this special Kyber Crystal that he had around his neck that would enhance his Force powers, and that's what made him so powerful. And that really isn't, to my knowledge, because, again, we haven't read every single thing or everything, in the new canon. Right. I've read a lot, but there's a lot of things, and there's also a lot of the books that they've come out with now are, what are they called now? It's not like the Art of Star Wars, although they still have those, but it's almost like these encyclopedias that they do for every movie. Oh, right. Yeah. And pretty much what they do is they go in depth into some of the things that were from each of those movies, or other Star Wars lore and sources. And there could be something where maybe he did, but as far as I know, from everything that I've read and everything that I know about the new canon, they no longer consider that canon. That was a story that just basically the expanded universe authors used in order to explain why Palpatine was so powerful. But that's not necessarily what it is. But again, keep in mind, Michael, that the whole canon behind the crystal is still the same. They didn't actually change that really at all. All they did was they expanded it. It should also be noted that the Kyber Crystal, the bigger crystals, are what actually power the Death Star laser. Right. Yeah, and they deal with that in the Catalyst novel. Yeah, and also in Rogue One. Yeah, well, and because Catalyst was the prequel to Rogue One, so go see Rogue One if you want a little bit more explanation as far as the Kyber Crystals. Rebels actually gives you some explanation. Actually, they give you a lot of, I was going to say it gives you a lot of information. Okay, right. Who's our next? Good one. Our next one comes from Tanya McElroy. With Jenna Erso and Rey being female leads, is it safe to say that Disney, who always has a princess story, are trying to move women to the forefront of the Star Wars franchise? I would say yes, but the thing is, it's not necessarily just because of the Disney princess thing. That's a trend that's happening in movies in general today.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are moving to having strong female leads. Certainly back in the day, with Carrie Fisher, she was like one of the pioneers of that, with her Princess Leia role, like being such a strong focal character in the original trilogy. But yeah, I think that people want to see that, women are tough too. We really don't get a chance to see female Jedi outside of, a few that we've seen like in like Shakti or Ayla Secura and, those. But we don't really get to focus, or Barriss Offee. We don't get to see them. You see them in cartoons and they could play more with that. But in
that was the beginning of a lot of that, like even Asajj Ventress, right, on the villain side of things,
right?
Or Mara Jade,
right,
who was in the expanded universe,
first books, yeah.
But even in general, I remember growing up, and I was a teenager in the 80s, that it was weird to see women in action scenes. Unless they were hitting somebody with a frying pan or something. The only one that I remember was Cynthia Rothrock.
Yeah.
And I just remember how odd that was.
Yeah.
To see her using all this martial arts, like, beating the crap out of all these guys. And how just out of place it was. And I think that what they're trying to do now is put women in the more traditional male action movie lead roles.
Dominant roles, yeah.
And it's gotten to the point now where it's not weird to me at all. Like, I'll see a woman fighting alongside a guy and just, destroying people, basically. And it's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're cheering her on just as much as
anybody else.
Schwarzenegger or, anybody else, yeah.
And in some cases, I actually enjoy it more. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people have been critical of the new Star Wars films because they think it's the whole social justice warrior movement where they're trying to empower women and all that. And I don't necessarily see it as that as much as it is twofold. I think that they're trying to just really bring more of an equality to it, because if you look at the past Star Wars films, they have been male dominated.
Yeah, I mean, they've always had a strong female character, whether you're talking about the original trilogy with Carrie Fisher or in the prequels with Padme Amidala.
Yeah, Natalie Portman certainly needs to be credited with her portrayal of Amidala, because after all, you have to remember that was a little bit more of an expansion, because she did have a lot more physical scenes. Mm-hmm. As far as especially fighting a little. Yeah.
Attack of the Clones, she was
out there, and it was a little bit more of an expansion. So I think that what they're trying to do is definitely make more of a concerted effort to bring women to the same level. And in order to do that, you have to undo a lot of the male-dominated movies that they've already had. So the only way that I would be critical of it is if I thought they were doing it just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah, but I think that, people, men aren't the only one with stories. There's
absolutely
plenty of people who have,
it shouldn't matter.
Yeah, and it shouldn't matter. But I think people just have a story. And I think Rey, I'm very interested to see how her story plays out, because we really don't know that much about her.
No, we don't. And
so
it actually goes into what you're saying, because there's her story, which is in the movies, but there's a lot of people who actually are in the, I want to say expanded universe, but it's really the expansion as far as the novels, the comics, the animated series. Look at all the strong female leads we have in Rebels.
Yeah, with
Hera
and Sabine, and even like the leader of the Mandalorians.
Yeah, yeah,
which is Sabine's
and
mother. Yeah,
even the leader of the Mandalorians, Satine, I think was her name, in the Clone Wars cartoons. You had a lot of people, a lot of female leads in there. In the novels, you have Rey Sloane. Now she's more of a villain, if you want to say that, because another thing that they've been doing. This sort of goes back a little bit to our political discussion, and they've been taking a lot of the Empire characters and just showing them as normal people who are doing their job that just happen to be on this side, and they have they see the rebels as terrorists
Right.
that are looking to upset the normal, they're trying to keep everything safe for all the citizens. And these guys, when you look at it from that point of view, you see a very different viewpoint on the Empire.
Yeah, because of course the villain is always going to think that they're right. And from their point of view, they are, because
And
they can make their own justification for it.
But the point is, a lot of them aren't even villains. When you look at what the Empire is really doing. Yeah. But a lot of these people are just like, radar technicians or,
Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, Matt.
The radar.
Yeah, a little bit of a shout out to Adam Driver's Saturday Night Live version. But you have somebody like, name escapes me, but the main character in Lost Stars, another woman. She works, she was friends with this guy on their planet, and they went off into different directions. They both started out in the Empire. He started to see that the Empire was corrupt and needed to be stopped. So he joins the rebellion. She never really got that memo.
Right.
She really believed that the Empire was really doing the right thing. And when she started to see these atrocities, she looked at it as a small faction of them. Like, that's not the Empire's actual goals or MO.
Yeah, I mean, because the Empire wanted her to see what they wanted her to see.
Exactly. So these are the kinds of things that I think are important, is that, yes, you're bringing out women more in the Star Wars universe, but you're expanding the storytelling.
I mean, and quite frankly, look who you have at the helm of Star Wars.
Sure,
Kathleen Kennedy. She's a woman. So, I mean, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And, I welcome it. I think it's going to bring some interesting stories and some interesting dynamics to the Star Wars universe, because things from a woman's perspective are a lot different than a man. So
that was a great question, actually.
Yep.
Actually, our next question is really good too.
Yeah. So our last one comes from Mr. Ron Sheard, and he asks, "Is the dark side more powerful? Could Luke have beaten Vader without tapping into the dark side?"
Well, I guess first you have to even argue if Luke truly tapped into the dark side.
I would say he did. And if you remember the scene at the end of...
I know, it was quite aggressive.
Well, not only that, but I mean, that's what lured him out in the first place. I mean, he was calm most of the time, but then when he threatened, his sister Leia, that kind of like woke something up in him. And as he started going at Vader, he was more aggressive. And then once he amputated his father's cybernetic hand,
yeah, I mean, you can
he kind of looked at it, and then
he was a little like, whoa, what am I doing?
Yeah. And then of course, after that, he said, and even the Emperor, he said, "Your hate has made you powerful." So of course, with him being a dark side guy, of course, he knows he could feel that. Because that's what they were trying to get him to do the whole time. That's why they brought him to him, because they were trying to
probably just had a hemorrhoid or something from sitting in that throne for so long. That's all it was. That's all he was feeling. Yeah.
No, but I mean, and I think that's just I think that's what it was. And I think Luke realized that he started to go too far, and then that's why he decided to stop. And then that's when he decided he wasn't going to turn. So yeah, I think Luke did tap into it. Now the question is, could he have beaten Vader without it?
Well,
let's just say he did. Let's say he did tap into it.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, we're really answering the second half, but that's because the second half is a lot more
interesting.
Not only is it more interesting, but I think it's more up for debate. Because, look, the dark side being more powerful has already really been answered in the films. I mean, Yoda addresses it, and the movies themselves address it by the fact that the dark side corrupts you. It's faster and it's easier, so you can get more powerful much quicker, but ultimately it destroys you.
Right.
So ultimately you're just going to destroy yourself. The light side really is more powerful
in the long run.
In the long run, and then of course you could even make an argument that the balance would really be
where you really want to be.
Where you really would want to be. And Luke even alludes to this a little. Now, he alluded to it a lot more in the Legends series of books and everything.
And in Rebels, because they brought that up too.
Yeah.
With Ezra, he had to, he had to tap into like the dark and the light a little bit to open up that particular cave.
Yeah, and it was showing that really there is a balance that you have to strike, and you're not necessarily evil if you tap into the dark side of the Force. It just depends on, your reasoning and what's going on. And you have to be careful because the dark side truly is bad.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to go too far over to it. But as far as could Luke beat him without it, yeah, I mean, there are certain things that you have to look at. Number one, I don't necessarily think at that point that Vader was really looking to want to kill his son. I don't think that even if he could have beaten Luke, his job really was to just get him to turn to the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
But after the conversation that they had, after Luke stepped off the AT-AT, and Vader was a little bit melancholy and a little bit more reflective and introspective, and dare I say it, he was a little softer.
And definitely conflicted.
And definitely conflicted. I don't think that the conflict started when, the Emperor was basically shooting Luke with Force lightning. I think that the conflict started right at that point when, Luke was bringing up all this stuff. And so ultimately, I don't think that Vader would have killed him anyway, even if he hadn't turned. I mean, it's actually an interesting thing for which to speculate because, I mean, who knows? Who knows really what would have happened if, but then again, I guess we do know because Luke did refuse to turn, and so the Emperor just started killing him, basically, and then Vader stopped him. But I do think that Luke probably could have done it.
I think what happened with Vader in that moment, he was caught off guard, honestly. I honestly think he was caught off guard. Because I think, okay, he's looking for his son. He's trying, and he's, of course, trying to tempt him. But I don't think he was ready. And here's why I don't think he was ready.
Oh, we're going to disagree.
I don't think he was ready for Luke's power because, one, he's young. So, of course, that burst of youthful fear, rage, and anger is a little bit different than when you're an adult. And I think it was more so, and of course, with Luke having his skill set and being able to open himself up to the Force, as we talked about before, I think that's what caught Vader off guard was how powerful his son was, because prior to the last time they had a duel was, on Cloud City, and that's when he lopped off Luke's hand. And of course, Luke wasn't really trained that well at that point.
Yeah, but you're talking about only a year or so that transpired.
Right. But I think in that time, Luke realized that, okay, I have to train in this a whole lot harder if I'm going to stand up to these guys. And he knows what he's going up against. Before, he was kind of like, well, he was acting on emotion because his friend's being in pain. But I think now that he had that experience after fighting Vader, he was like, okay, look, I need to train.
But see,
I need to get
Vader
deeper.
wasn't actually caught off guard. This is one thing that I don't think a lot of the Star Wars fans have really put together. And to be honest, I didn't for years.
Okay.
Vader wanted that reaction. He elicited that reaction. The whole reason why he was trying to, especially when he figured out and found out the sister thing, he was trying to find whatever Luke's weakness would be emotionally.
Right.
Then when Luke thought of Leia and the sister connection, okay, that surprised Vader. But then he was like, okay, well, this is what I'm trying to do anyway, so I'm going to keep going with it. Because they wanted Luke to turn to the dark side. They wanted him to feel that and feel that power and say, yeah, this is what I want to do. Vader wasn't surprised at all. He wanted that aggression.
No, he wanted it. I just didn't think he expected it to be that strong.
Well, maybe not, but I mean, part of the reason why Vader pretty much had to do it, because remember that in order for a Sith to truly do what they need to do, they need to defeat the earlier one.
The master, yeah.
Yeah, or at least defeat the other apprentice if they want to be the apprentice to the current master.
Right.
The thing is, now Vader, I don't think was going to try and die, but he was fully prepared to be beaten because that's the only way that Luke can complete his path to the dark side. And it's a cybernetic hand anyway. So Vader just, because if you really look at that whole ending duel where that really cool music starts and all that.
It's like one of my most chilling favorite scenes.
Yeah,
man.
and all Vader's really doing is just basically defending. He's not even really trying. And a lot of people were thinking at first that that's because Luke, an enraged Luke that was tapped into the dark side, was just so powerful it overwhelmed Vader. And I know there are a lot of people that do make that argument. But if you really think of it in its totality, and especially how powerful Vader still was in Return of the Jedi, it's not like Vader just suddenly lost all of his power in a matter of like 5 or 10 minutes. Not to mention the fact that Vader was absolutely destroying Luke for a while during that fight.
I don't know, because when they first started, I mean, Luke, once again, like, he kicked him down a flight of steps. When Vader came back up, I mean, he's like, you were unwise to lower your defenses. They kept going. And every time he went at Luke, like Luke was flipping on top of catwalks and everything. So I don't think he really, except for that one move where he threw the lightsaber, I don't think he was ready for, Luke was prepared for that one.
Yeah, but I mean, Vader wasn't, he was just doing his thing.
Yeah.
And, he's still super powerful. If Vader wanted him dead, he would have been dead.
So you think that...
Oh, without question. Vader was not losing power. I mean, there's another argument, which I do half subscribe to. So, and you could use this against what I'm saying, in a way, is the fact that because Vader was more and more conflicted, the light side was creeping into him. So it was almost like because of that, his power was softening because all of his power came from his hatred. And you see that even in the new canon books. If you start to read a lot of them, when Vader really wanted to do like turbo mode or something,
right,
he would actually inflict pain on himself.
Right.
And his suit was designed to cause him pain when he needed it to. So that way, and he was always in pain anyway because of his injuries. So he would just tap into that pain and allow that pain to consume him. And then that would just give him an extra burst of dark side energy so he could do whatever he wanted to do. So you could say that if that was starting to go away, that you would have a weaker Vader, but you didn't really see... A lot of it, I think, was Vader trying to get Luke to complete his journey to the dark side.
Yeah, I believe that's what he was ultimately trying to do. But I still stand there. I don't know. I just think that he wasn't ready for Luke's... I knew he was ready to have the battle, but I didn't think he was expecting... It's almost kind of like that punch. That first punch is like, whoa, okay, that kind of rocked me a little bit. And then he was on the defensive. But... I guess we'll never really truly know. Well,
we'd have to go back and watch the commentary that George Lucas did during that whole scene.
Yeah.
That might be fun to do one day.
Yeah.
Actually, that's one thing that we've never done together is watch the Lucas commentary on the
That's true.
on the films.
That is true.
Ever.
Yeah.
That's something we got to do now.
I got to put that on the bucket list.
I got that whole 4K setup now. And,
yeah, man. And the Blu-ray, yeah, so weird.
Yeah. Granted, it's not going to have the whole Dolby Atmos sound through, but it'll still be cool. Yeah, we'll have to do that.
All right.
Well, that looks like that's our show today, huh?
Yeah, all right, kid, let's blow this thing and go home.
All right, well, that sounds good to me. I'm Eric Vancil.
I'm Darryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.